The morning sun shone over the big music academy, a place full of rich students and shiny pianos. Every hallway was filled with laughter, music, and the sound of soft footsteps from students wearing clean white shoes. But at the end of the hall, near the back entrance, a woman named Maria quietly pushed her cleaning cart. She wore an old uniform and carried a small smile on her face. Maria was not a teacher or a student. She was the maid who cleaned the academy every day. Her daughter Lena often came after school to help her mother. Lena was small, with bright eyes and soft brown hair that always fell over her face. She carried a small bag filled with her school books and sometimes an apple for her mother. Every evening when most students went home, Lena walked inside the quiet music rooms. She loved to sit near the door and listen to the sound of music that came from inside. The academy was known for its talent. Students practiced the piano for hours, some with perfect hands, others with tears of frustration. Lena would sit and listen quietly, her heart moving with every note. She didn't know how to read music, but the sound made her feel something she couldn't explain. She often whispered to herself, "It's like magic." Mama and Maria would smile tiredly one evening. Maria finished cleaning early and went to get more soap from the storeroom. Lena stayed behind in the big hall where the grand piano stood. The lights were soft and golden. The air smelled of polish and dust. She looked around, making sure no one was there. Then slowly, she walked toward the piano. The piano looked huge and royal, its black and white keys shining under the light. Lena touched one key carefully. The sound echoed through the empty hall. Her heart jumped. She smiled shyly and pressed another key. Then another. The soft notes danced in the air. Before she knew it, her fingers started to move on their own. She didn't know the rules or the notes, but the melody came from her heart. It was simple but beautiful, full of feelings she couldn't speak. It sounded like the laughter of her mother, the sound of rain on the roof, the quiet nights when they had nothing but each other. The more she played, the more her fear faded away. For that moment, Lena forgot she was poor, forgotten, or small. She was just a girl, and the piano was her world. Maria came back quietly and froze in the doorway. Her eyes widened as she saw her daughter sitting at the piano. Lena's fingers moved like they belonged there. The melody was not perfect, but it had a soul. Maria's eyes filled with tears. When Lena stopped playing, she quickly stood up, afraid she would get scolded. "I'm sorry, Mama. I didn't mean to," she said in a rush. But Maria only walked closer and touched her daughter's face gently. "You played that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Lena nodded shyly. "It just came to me, Mama," she said softly. Maria couldn't speak for a moment. She had cleaned this academy for many years. She had seen rich students with personal teachers, new pianos, and expensive clothes, but she had never seen someone play with such pure feeling. It was as if her daughter's heart spoke through the piano. That night, as they walked home together under the soft streetlights, Maria kept thinking about what she had heard. The city was busy, but her mind was full of the melody. She held Lena's small hand and whispered, "You have something special, my child," Lena smiled. But she didn't believe her. She said, "No one will care, Mama. I'm just your daughter." Maria stopped walking and looked at her. "Never say that again," she said softly. "Talent doesn't care where you come from, Lena. It only cares about what is inside you." Lena looked down, her eyes shining, but she said nothing. She didn't know that her life was about to change forever. The next day at the academy, one of the music teachers was practicing in the big hall. Lena and Maria were cleaning near the door again. When the teacher left for a moment, Lena looked at the piano once more. Her fingers itched to touch the keys. She remembered the feeling from last night, the peace, the joy, the dream. She wanted to play again, but she was afraid. What if someone saw her? What if she got in trouble? But her heart whispered louder than her fear. She looked around and pressed a soft note. Then another. This time the sound was clearer, braver, and full of emotion. What Lena didn't know was that someone was watching her from the upper balcony. The famous Maestro, Mr. Ricardo. He had come early for his class and heard the sound of someone playing below. When he looked down, he saw a little girl in simple clothes. Sitting at the piano, her fingers were small. Her back straight, her face full of focus, he frowned, confused. Who was this girl? As he listened, his frown slowly disappeared. The notes she played were not from any book, but they had life. They told a story he couldn't explain. When she stopped, he whispered to himself, That child. She plays like she's lived 100 years. That was the moment everything began to change, and that was the day the hidden melody was found. The next morning came with soft rain and gray clouds. The music academy was quieter than usual, and the air smelled of wet earth and coffee. Maria walked through the empty hallway, her mop in hand, while Lena followed behind her. Carrying a small bucket, neither of them spoke much. But something had changed since last night. Maria couldn't stop thinking about her daughter's music, and Lena couldn't stop hearing the piano's voice in her head. When they reached the big hall, the grand piano stood silently in the middle, shining under the dim lights. Lena looked at it for a long moment, her heart beating faster. Maria noticed her gaze and whispered softly, "Not now, my dear, someone might come." Lena nodded, but her fingers twitched, as if they remembered every note she had played. She didn't know that high above, behind the curtain on the upper floor, the maestro, Mr. Ricardo, was already there. Watching silently, he had not forgotten the sound from yesterday. It had been stuck in his mind all night. He was a man who had trained hundreds of students, won awards, and traveled the world, but he had never heard music that came from such innocence. He wanted to see that little girl again, to know if what he heard was real or just his imagination. When Maria left for a moment to clean another room, Lena sat down near the piano again. Her eyes followed the black and white keys as if they were calling her name. Her hands were small and her clothes were plain, but inside her chest lived a rhythm she couldn't control. Slowly, she lifted the piano lid and pressed one soft note. The sound echoed through the hall like a whisper. Then she played another and another. Each note carried a feeling, a piece of her world, a dream she had never spoken aloud. Mr. Ricardo leaned forward from above. His heart moved in a strange way. There was no fear, no showing off, only truth in her music. It was as if the piano understood her pain, her love, her small hopes. When she stopped and looked around, afraid someone had heard, the maestro stepped forward. His footsteps echoed across the floor. Lena froze, her hands still on the keys. Maria entered at that same moment and gasped when she saw him. "Maestro Ricardo," she said quickly, bowing her head. "I'm sorry, sir." She didn't mean to. The maestro raised his hand to stop her. His voice was calm but strong. "So this is your daughter?" Maria nodded, trembling. "Yes, sir. I'm sorry if she caused trouble." He looked at Lena and said, "What is your name, little one?" "Lena," she said softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you know what you just played?" He asked. Lena shook her head. "No, sir, I just play what I feel." The maestro's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Play what you feel," he repeated. "Interesting." He looked at Maria, then back at the girl. "Do you know how difficult it is to make music that truly feels alive?" he said. Lena looked down, not knowing how to answer. Her small fingers rubbed against each other nervously. Mr. Ricardo turned and said, "Tomorrow morning, come to this hall again." Maria's eyes widened in surprise. "Sir, I want to see if what I heard today was real or just luck," he said. His tone serious but curious, then he walked away, leaving both mother and daughter standing in silence. Maria turned to Lena and whispered, "Do you know what this means?" Lena shook her head, confused. "It means you must be brave." "My love," Maria said, holding her hand tightly. "It means someone important has seen you." That night Lena couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the small window above her head. Rain tapped against the glass, and the sound mixed with the memory of the piano. She kept replaying the moment, the maestro's voice, his serious eyes, his strange interest. Part of her was scared, but part of her felt something new. Hope. She whispered softly, "Maybe music really does hear me," and closed her eyes. The next morning, the academy was bright again, sunlight filling the rooms. Maria wore her cleanest uniform, and Lena combed her hair neatly when they arrived. The maestro was already in the hall. Standing beside the piano, he pointed to the chair and said, "Sit." Lena sat carefully, her hands resting on her lap. He said nothing for a moment, just looked at her like he was reading her thoughts. Then he placed a sheet of music in front of her. "Play this," he said. Lena looked at the paper, covered with lines and notes she didn't understand. Her chest tightened. She whispered, "I can't read this, sir." The maestro frowned. "You cannot read music?" She shook her head. "No, sir. I never learned." Maria stepped forward nervously. "Please forgive her, maestro. We cannot afford lessons." Mr. Ricardo stared at Lena for a long moment, then slowly took the sheet away. Then play something you know, he said. Play what you played yesterday. Lena took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and began to play. The first few notes were soft and uncertain, but then, like a wave, her emotion returned. Her hands moved as if guided by invisible strings. The music filled the room with warmth, sadness, and light all at once. The maestro felt something move inside his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. When the last note faded, silence filled the hall. He walked closer and said softly, "You play from your heart, not from your eyes." Lena didn't know what that meant, but she smiled shyly. Maria wiped a tear from her cheek. Proud but afraid of what might come next, the maestro looked at them both and said, "Come again tomorrow." He turned away, hiding the small smile forming on his face. For the first time in a long while, music had surprised him, and that surprise had come from the daughter of a maid. The next morning, the academy was alive with sound again. Students rushed through the hallways holding sheet music, some laughing, others nervous in the middle of all the noise. Maria and Lena walked quietly, both feeling out of place. They could feel eyes watching them, curious, judging, whispering. To everyone, they were just the maid and her little girl, not part of this shining world of music. When they entered the main hall, the famous maestro, Mr. Ricardo, was already standing by the piano. His tall figure and calm face made everyone silent as he turned his gaze toward them. He said in a deep voice, "Come, Lena." Lena walked forward slowly, her hands clasped together, her heart beating fast. Maria stood in the corner, trying to look brave. The maestro looked down at the girl and said, "I want to see something." He reached into his bag and pulled out a sheet of music. It was a long, complex piece full of sharp notes and quick changes. Every student in the academy knew it. It was called The Storm of Silence, a composition known to break even skilled players. He placed it on the piano and said, "Play this." The room went quiet. A few students standing by the door giggled softly. "She can't even read notes," one whispered. "She's just a cleaner's daughter," another said under their breath. But Lena didn't hear them. Her eyes were locked on the piano keys. She looked up at the maestro and whispered, "I cannot read it, sir." The maestro nodded slowly, his eyes unreadable. "I know," he said, "but I want you to listen first." He sat down beside her, his fingers touching the keys with the confidence of a master. The room filled with thunderous sound, sharp, fast, full of fire and emotion. Every note rolled like waves in a storm. Crashing and rising, the students watched in awe, their teacher playing with passion that shook their hearts. When he stopped, the room was silent again. He turned to Lena and said softly, "Now you play it," Maria gasped. "Sir." "She can't." But the maestro raised his hand, his voice firm. "Let her try." Lena's fingers trembled as she touched the keys. She closed her eyes, trying to remember the rhythm. At first she hesitated, pressing soft, uneven notes. The students smirked, one whispered, "She's lost," but then something changed. Her breathing slowed, her body relaxed. She began to follow the memory of what she heard. Not the notes, but the feeling. The storm began again. But this time it sounded different. It was not perfect, not practiced. It was real, raw, emotional. Each note carried a part of her heart. Her small hands moved faster, stronger, more sure. Her music was not about showing skill, it was about telling a story. Maria covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. The students who were laughing before went silent. Even the maestro's expression softened. He leaned slightly forward. Listening carefully, Lena's music didn't sound like his, but it touched something deeper. When she finished, her last note faded like a sigh. The entire hall was quiet. Not a single sound. Then the maestro spoke, his voice low but filled with emotion. "You played it your way," he said. "Not as written, but as felt." Lena looked down, unsure if she had done something wrong. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered. "I couldn't remember all the notes." He shook his head slowly. "Do not apologize for honesty." His voice softened. "True music does not live on paper. It lives here," he said, pointing to his chest. Maria stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Thank you, Maestro," but he interrupted gently. "Do not thank me yet. Mrs. Maria." He turned to the other students who were still frozen. "You all saw what happened," he said. She played without training, without reading, but her heart spoke through every sound. He looked back at Lena and said, "That is what most of you have forgotten." The students lowered their heads in shame. For years they had practiced for perfection, not emotion. Now a maid's daughter had reminded them what real music was. After everyone left, the maestro stayed behind with Maria and Lena. He said quietly, "Lena, from tomorrow you will come here every morning before the students arrive." Maria gasped. "Sir, you mean—" "Yes," he said simply. "I will teach her." Maria's eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She whispered, "We cannot pay, sir." Mr. Ricardo smiled faintly. "You will not pay with money." He looked at Lena. "You will pay with your honesty. That is the rarest gift in this place." Lena didn't fully understand his words, but she felt something deep inside, pride, hope, and a spark she had never felt before. She looked at her mother, who smiled through tears that night. As they walked home under the fading sunset, Lena held her mother's hand tighter. She whispered, "Mama, he said he will teach me." Maria smiled softly. "Yes, my child, but remember, talent is a gift, and gifts must be carried with kindness." Lena nodded slowly, her eyes bright. The sky above them turned orange and pink, like a promise waiting to unfold. Back at the academy, the maestro stood alone in the empty hall. Staring at the piano, he whispered to himself, "A storm can come from silence, even from the smallest hands." He smiled faintly and touched the piano keys once more. The sound that filled the air reminded him that greatness can rise from the humblest hearts. And for the first time in years, the maestro felt truly inspired again. The sun rose gently over the music academy, painting golden light on the marble floors. Inside the hall, a quiet tension filled the air. Today was not a normal day. Today, Maestro Ricardo had arranged something that would test everyone, and especially Lena. Lena stood outside the big door with her mother, Maria. Her small fingers clutched the edge of her dress, and her heart thumped so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Inside, the grand piano waited under a single spotlight. The same piano that had become her friend, her secret, and her dream. But now, it felt like a mountain she had to climb. Maria knelt down beside her daughter. Her hands trembled slightly as she fixed Lena's hair. "My sweet girl," she whispered, "whatever happens inside, remember who you are." Lena nodded, her eyes nervous but bright. She didn't feel ready, but she knew she couldn't run away. The big door opened with a heavy creak. A tall man in a suit nodded for them to enter. As they walked inside, Lena saw the hall filled with people, students, parents, and teachers. They whispered to each other, eyes full of curiosity and doubt. Everyone wanted to see the maid's daughter who dared to sit at the piano. At the front, Maestro Ricardo stood proudly. His face was calm, but inside he too felt nervous. He had arranged this small gathering not to humiliate her, but to show the truth, that music is not born from wealth, but from heart. Still, he knew this was a cruel test. He looked at Lena and said softly, "Are you ready?" Lena swallowed hard and nodded. Her knees shook as she climbed onto the piano bench. The hall fell silent, so quiet that even the ticking of the clock could be heard. She placed her hands on the keys but could not press them. Her mind was full of voices. The whispers, the laughter, the fear. She remembered the rich girls who mocked her, the teachers who looked down at her, and suddenly her confidence began to fade. Maria watched from the back, her hands clasped tightly. She wanted to run up there and hold her daughter, but she knew she couldn't. This was Lena's moment, her test, her destiny. The maestro noticed her fear and said quietly, "Take your time, child." But his words felt far away. Lena's breath quickened, her eyes blurred. She felt trapped between hope and fear then. She heard a small sound, her mother's soft whisper, "You can do it, my love." It was faint, but it reached her heart. Lena took a slow breath, closed her eyes, and pressed one key. The note echoed through the hall, light and fragile. Then another and another. Each sound was like a heartbeat finding its rhythm. Slowly the music began to grow. The audience leaned forward, confused at first, then surprised. The simple notes turned into something deeper. The melody rose like a story full of pain and beauty. Lena forgot the crowd, forgot the fear, forgot everything but the piano. She saw herself as a little girl listening through doors, cleaning floors, dreaming quietly. Now, all that emotion flowed through her fingers. It was not perfect, but it was pure. Maestro Ricardo stood still, his eyes softening with every note. He saw the truth. This child was not just talented. She was born with a gift that came once in a lifetime. Her music didn't just sound good, it spoke. It told the story of struggle, love, and hope without a single word. When the last note faded into silence, Lena's hands fell onto her lap. She looked up, her eyes full of tears, afraid of what she would see. The room was completely silent. For a long moment, no one moved, no one breathed. Then, one slow clap broke the silence. It was the maestro, his eyes glistening. Soon everyone joined in, clapping louder, standing to their feet. The hall filled with applause that echoed like thunder. Maria pressed her hands over her mouth and began to cry. Her daughter stood on that stage like a star. All the whispers and cruel looks turned into admiration. People who once ignored them now looked at Lena with respect. The maestro stepped forward, his voice trembling slightly. "You have reminded us," he said, "that music belongs to every soul, not just to those born with gold." He turned to the audience and continued, "This girl has something you cannot teach, something no book can give, heart." The crowd fell silent again. Touched by his words, he looked back at Lena and said, "You played not with fear, but with truth." "And truth is rare." Lena blinked, still shaking, not sure what to say. She whispered softly, "Thank you, sir." The maestro smiled and placed his hand on her shoulder. "From today," he said, "you are no longer just a maid's daughter. You are my student." The audience gasped softly. Maria couldn't believe what she had just heard. Her knees went weak and she held the bench to keep from falling. Tears streamed down her face, not of sadness, but of pride. Lena turned and saw her mother crying. She ran to her, wrapping her small arms around her waist. Maria held her tightly, whispering again and again, "You did it, my girl. You did it." The maestro watched them quietly, his heart heavy and full at the same time. He knew this was only the beginning of a long journey, a journey that would change not only the girl's life but his own. Outside, the sunlight fell on the academy doors. The same doors that had once felt too high for a maid's daughter now opened with pride. And somewhere deep inside, Lena's fear melted away, replaced by a quiet promise that she would never stop playing. Because music had finally found her voice. Days passed, but the sound of that performance still echoed inside the academy walls. Students spoke about it in hushed voices. Teachers whispered about the miracle girl. Even the cleaners and guards smiled when they saw her small figure walking through the hallway. The maid's daughter who made the maestro cry. That was how everyone remembered her. But for Lena, everything still felt like a dream. She didn't understand why people looked at her differently now. She still helped her mother carry cleaning supplies after practice. She still wore her simple dress, her shoes with tiny holes at the sides. Only one thing had changed, her heart. Every morning, she practiced in the quiet music hall before sunrise. The piano became her best friend, her secret diary. Sometimes she laughed while playing. Sometimes she cried softly. Maestro Ricardo often stood by the window. Watching her in silence, he never interrupted. He just listened. Because every note she played carried more truth than any lecture he could give. One day after practice, the maestro said softly, "Lena, there will be a concert next week." Her hands froze in midair. "A concert?" she whispered. He nodded. "The Academy's annual performance, where our best students play before the city's guests and critics." She blinked nervously. "But I'm not one of them, sir." The maestro smiled faintly. "You are now." The news spread fast. Lena would perform in the grand concert. Some people clapped in excitement, but others didn't like it. "How can a maid's daughter stand on the same stage as us?" One girl said angrily. "She doesn't even know how to read notes." Another complained. The maestro ignored the noise, but Lena heard every cruel word. That night she lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, her heart filled with fear again. She whispered, "What if I fail, Mama?" Maria brushed her daughter's hair gently. "My love," she said softly, "people will always talk, but you must answer with your music." She kissed her forehead and smiled. "When you play, remember who you are, my brave little girl." Lena held her mother's hand tightly, finding courage in her warmth that night. She dreamed of the piano, not as an instrument, but as a friend waiting for her. The concert night arrived. The academy was decorated with golden lights and white flowers. People from the city came wearing fine clothes and bright jewels. The hall glowed with excitement backstage. Students tuned their instruments nervously. Whispering prayers, Lena stood in the corner. Clutching her dress, her breath short, her mother stood behind the curtain. Whispering encouragement, the maestro approached her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you ready?" he asked. Lena looked up and said softly, "I'm scared." He smiled. "Good, and that means you care." When it was her turn, the announcer called her name. Next, performing a solo piece, our youngest and newest talent, Miss Lena Maria. The hall grew quiet. Lena stepped out slowly, the bright lights almost blinding her. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her every move. Some looked curious, others doubtful. She took a deep breath and sat down at the piano. For a moment, her fingers wouldn't move. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. Then she remembered her mother's words. She remembered the maestro's smile. And the first time she had touched those keys in an empty room, she closed her eyes and began to play. The first notes came like whispers, soft and trembling. Then the sound grew stronger, fuller, alive. It was not a piece from the book, and it was her own creation. A melody born from her life, her dreams, her pain, her love. The sound filled the hall like sunlight breaking through clouds. Every note carried her story. The poor girl cleaning floors. The nights she watched others practice, the mornings she dreamed alone. Her fingers moved faster, her heart completely open. The maestro stood in the shadows, his eyes wet.
He had never seen someone so young play with such soul.
When she reached the final part, the melody changed. It rose high, then faded into a quiet hum. Her hands slowed. Her breath softened. And then she pressed the last note, a single, gentle sound that floated in the air like a prayer. Then there was silence, not a sound, not a whisper, not even a breath. The room was frozen. Everyone trapped inside the echo of that last note. Lena's hands dropped to her lap. Her heart still racing, she didn't dare look up, afraid of what she might see. And then, the maestro clapped, one strong, echoing clap that broke the stillness. Soon others joined. Then the whole room exploded into applause. People stood, shouting her name, cheering, clapping. Maria covered her mouth, tears rolling down her cheeks. She whispered through her sobs, "That's my daughter." The maestro walked to the stage, his steps slow and steady. He stood beside Lena and placed a hand on her shoulder. He looked at the audience and said, "Tonight you did not hear perfection. You heard truth." He turned to Lena. "And truth is music's greatest gift." The applause grew louder, filling the hall like a storm. Lena looked at her mother, her eyes shining. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small or poor. She felt seen, heard, understood. The room that once made her nervous now felt like home. That night, as they walked home under the stars, Maria held her daughter's hand. She said softly, "You made the world quiet tonight, my love." Lena smiled and looked up at the sky. "Maybe music can really make people listen," she whispered. And her mother nodded. "Yes, and your music made them feel." Behind them, in the academy window, the maestro watched quietly. He smiled to himself and whispered. Her melody spoke louder than words. And once again, the great hall fell silent, not from emptiness, but from awe. The night after the concert, the city couldn't stop talking about the little girl who silenced the crowd. Newspapers printed her photo beside the maestro, calling her the girl with the golden heart. But while everyone celebrated, Lena sat quietly by the window of her small home. Her hands rested in her lap, her eyes still glowing from the memories of the stage. She could still hear the music in her mind, the sound of applause, the sound of dreams coming true. Maria sat beside her, smiling proudly. "You made magic, my love," she whispered. "Even the stars listened to you tonight." Lena looked at her mother and said softly, "Mama, I think I finally know who I am." Maria kissed her forehead and replied, "You are my brave Lena, the girl who turned silence into song." The next morning, the maestro arrived at the academy early. He walked straight to the piano hall where sunlight poured through the high windows. He placed his hand gently on the piano, his reflection glowing on the polished wood. He smiled faintly. It was the same piano that had changed everything. He whispered to himself, "So many years I played for fame, but she plays for truth." Lena entered the hall quietly, carrying her small notebook filled with scribbles of melodies. When the maestro saw her, his eyes softened. "You came early," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied shyly. "The music kept playing in my head." He chuckled softly. "That is the curse and blessing of real musicians." He motioned her to sit, and for the next hour, they played together, a teacher and student, master and child. Their music mixed like sunlight and shadow, full of harmony, emotion, and life. The maestro was amazed at how quickly she understood the feeling behind every sound. She didn't need long explanations or heavy lessons. She simply felt the music, and that was something no training could ever give. After they finished, the maestro sat quietly for a moment. He looked at Lena and said softly, "You remind me of someone." Lena tilted her head. Who, sir? He smiled sadly. My sister? Lena blinked in surprise. Your sister? The maestro nodded slowly, his eyes distant. She was like you, full of music and light, he said. But she never got her chance. He stood up and walked toward the window. When we were young, she dreamed of playing for the world. But we were poor, he continued. I got the chance to study, but she stayed behind, cleaning houses to help our family. His voice trembled slightly. She died before she ever touched a grand piano. Lena felt a lump in her throat. I'm sorry, sir, she whispered. The maestro turned, his eyes glistening. When I first heard you play, Lena, it was like hearing her again. Maria, who had entered quietly with tea, froze at his words. The great maestro, the man everyone feared, had tears in his eyes. He looked at Lena and said, You reminded me that music belongs to every soul, rich or poor. He took a deep breath, his voice thick with emotion. You healed something inside me I didn't know was broken. Lena didn't know what to say. She only smiled softly and whispered, Maybe music remembers her too. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Only the soft hum of the piano filled the silence. Then the maestro wiped his eyes quickly and said, Lena, I want you to play again, not for the academy, not for the crowd, but for the world. Lena's eyes widened. The world? He nodded. There will be a charity performance in the city theater next month. He looked at Maria. I want her to represent the academy, Maria gasped, her hands trembling. Sir, that's for famous players. The maestro smiled. And she is one now. The news spread faster than lightning. People were amazed, some jealous, some proud. The same students who once mocked her now wished to learn from her. But Lena stayed humble, always remembering what her mother said. Kindness keeps music pure, every day. She practiced not to impress, but to express. Her music grew deeper, stronger, more beautiful. On the day of the charity concert, the theater was full. The stage lights glowed softly. The audience whispering in excitement, Lena walked out, dressed in a simple white gown the maestro had given her. She sat at the piano, her small hands calm. Her eyes filled with peace as she began to play. A warm hush spread through the hall. The melody was gentle, full of heart and healing. Each note told a story of a girl who rose from silence. The maestro watched from the side, his hand covering his mouth as tears formed again. He saw not just Lena. He saw his sister, his past, his lost hope. Every sound she played reached deep into his soul. When she finished, she looked toward him and smiled. And that simple smile broke his heart open. The audience stood clapping wildly. But the maestro didn't move. He just wiped his tears quietly. When Lena came down from the stage, she ran to him and hugged him tightly. He whispered softly, You played for her, didn't you? Lena nodded. Yes, for her, and for you. Maria joined them, her eyes wet with pride. The maestro placed his hand on Lena's head. My dear, he said softly, I have taught many, but you taught me something greater. What's that, sir? Lena asked. He smiled. That music without heart is just noise. That night, when they left the theater, the stars seemed brighter than ever. Maria walked between them, holding Lena's hand in one and the maestro's in the other. For the first time, all three of them felt connected, by pain, by love, by music. And as they walked through the quiet street, the maestro whispered, Sometimes, the smallest voice carries the biggest truth. Lena looked up at him and said softly, And sometimes, the music plays even after the sound is gone. He smiled through his tears and nodded. Yes, my child, that's what you've taught me. Months passed since Lena's name first touched the city newspapers. Her story spread like music carried by the wind. People from far places came to the academy just to see the little girl who had played with her heart. But even as her fame grew, Lena stayed the same. She still smiled shyly, still helped her mother carry her bag, and still whispered a prayer before every song. The maestro often said, Fame can make you forget who you are, but true music always reminds you. He watched her grow, not just in skill, but in spirit. Every note she played carried more depth, more honesty. It wasn't about showing off anymore. It was about sharing what she felt. One morning, the academy received a letter from a great music foundation in another country. They had heard Lena's story and wanted her to perform in an international concert. The maestro called her and Maria into his office. He handed her the letter with a proud smile. Lena, they want you, Maria's eyes filled with tears. But sir, we can't travel, we don't have the money. The maestro placed his hand over hers. Do not worry, Maria. This is not a gift of money, and it's a gift of destiny. Lena couldn't believe it. She held the paper close to her chest, her heart beating fast. Mama, can we really go? She whispered. Maria nodded slowly, still in shock. Yes, my love. The world wants to hear your song. In the weeks that followed, Lena practiced harder than ever. The maestro guided her with patience and warmth. He taught her not only how to play, but how to feel every sound. Music is like breathing, he said softly. It should come from life, not from pride. And Lena understood, because her music had always come from the life she lived. On the day of the journey, Maria packed their small bags carefully. They didn't own much, just clothes, Lena's old notebook, and a small photo of her father who had passed away years ago. Maria whispered to the photo, She's going to make you proud. Then she hugged her daughter tightly. Promise me, Lena, no matter how big the world becomes, never forget where you began. Lena smiled softly. I'll always remember, Mama. I started with you. When they arrived at the grand concert hall overseas, it felt like another world. The lights were brighter, the audience larger, and the stage seemed endless. Lena stood backstage, staring at the piano under the golden spotlight. She felt a wave of fear, not the fear of failure, but the weight of meaning. She was not playing for herself anymore. She was playing for her mother, for the maestro, for every person who had ever been told they were not enough. The maestro stood beside her, his old hands shaking slightly. You know, he said with a smile, this might be my last concert before I retire. Lena turned in surprise. You mean, you won't teach anymore? He nodded gently. My time is almost done, my dear, but yours is just beginning. She looked at him with tears in her eyes. Then I will play for you tonight. Sir, he smiled. No, play for the world, and let me listen in silence when her name was called. The hall went dark except for one golden beam of light. She walked out slowly, her white dress glowing like morning snow. The audience went quiet, thousands of faces watching her. Maria sat in the front row holding her breath. The maestro stood behind the curtain, his heart pounding. Lena sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes floated softly, gentle as the voice of a child. Then the melody grew, stronger, deeper, more powerful. It carried everything she had lived through. The small room, the sound of her mother's laughter, the day she met the maestro, the fear, the tears, the hope. Her fingers danced. Her soul spoke, and the world listened as the last note faded. The hall stayed silent, not from confusion, but from awe. Every person felt something in their chest that words couldn't describe. Even the maestro, who had heard music all his life, felt his knees weaken. He wiped his eyes and whispered, She did it. A moment later, the crowd stood up, clapping, cheering, calling her name. Maria cried openly, her hands over her heart. The maestro stepped onto the stage and hugged Lena tightly. He whispered in her ear, You have given me peace. Child, she looked up at him confused. Peace? He nodded. Yes, because now I know my sister's dream didn't die. It lived through you. His voice broke, and tears ran down his cheeks for the first time in his life. The great maestro Ricardo cried without shame, and everyone in the hall saw it, a man touched by the power of a pure heart. Later that night, when the hall was empty and quiet again, Lena stood by the piano. Her fingers touched the keys one last time. Softly, lovingly, she whispered, Thank you for listening to me when no one else did. Maria came and hugged her from behind, resting her chin on her shoulder. My little girl, she said softly. You didn't just play music. You changed lives. Lena smiled. No, Mama. It was never me. It was the music. The maestro walked toward them slowly, his cane tapping gently on the floor. He said with a soft smile, Talent is a gift, but what you did tonight, that was grace. He handed Lena a small box. Inside it was a silver locket shaped like a music note. It was my sister's, he said, and now it belongs to you. Lena's eyes filled with tears. I'll never take it off, she promised. The maestro looked at both of them and said quietly, Never forget, true talent is not measured by how you play, but by how you make others feel. And with that, he turned toward the piano, pressing one final note, soft, warm, endless. The sound floated in the air like a blessing. That night, as they left the hall, the moonlight fell on Lena's face. She smiled and whispered, "The world heard me, Mama." Maria hugged her tight. "Yes, my love. And they will never forget." Far behind them, the maestro stood at the window watching them go. He whispered to the stars, "Her music will outlive us all." And somewhere in the quiet night, the piano answered softly, just one last note, a note that carried the story of a maid's daughter who turned silence into a song that never ends.